Hello and welcome to another Caseware webinar. Today we'll be covering the Cloud Collaborate product. This is part one of a three-part series, so do be sure to sign up to the other parts as well. My name's James and I'll be hosting the webinar today alongside the fantastically fabulous Phil, who will be presenting today. He's one of our education and media consultants. And on today's webinar, we're also joined by a new member of the team, Sophie Goodwin, who will be shadowing with us today. As always, we'll be running a live Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So please do use the Q&A button shown on screen there. And for any technical issues that you have with the stream or anything like that, do just use the chat function, the separate one on screen there, and I'll respond to you as soon as possible. A recording of today's session will be made available on both the knowledge base and our YouTube channel, to which we'd encourage you to subscribe as well. We do post all old webinars there, as well as all the quick vids as well, which are found on the knowledge base. Now to hand over to Phil to run through the agenda for today.
Yes, thank you, James. And yeah, thank you guys for attending today's webinar. As James mentioned, we're going to be looking at Caseware Collaborate. So obviously the Caseware Cloud, some of the functionality that's available within the Caseware Cloud. The idea is to give it a very much introduction to the Caseware Cloud. Obviously, this is the first part of three parts where we'll be looking at the Cloud Collaborate in its entirety. So we'll be focusing on things like navigation and some of the navigation options that people may not be necessarily aware of or may not use as much as some of the other options that we can see. So things like filters and how you can filter the information that you see on the cloud to only show that information that is relevant for you, regarding whether, if, for example, if you're preparing information within the smart engagement products, if you were using multiple different products, how can you see all of the different files that you have access to or that you're working on, or how do you only see the ones that you're working as a preparer or reviewer on? So we're going to look at some of the aspects such as that. We'll be looking at some of the templates that are available, how we can add contacts into the cloud and we can collaborate with them. It's not just an internal collaboration tool within the cloud, it's also a collaboration tool with our contacts, with our clients. So in your respect, your clients, we can also share content with them. How we can do that within the Caseware Cloud we'll be looking at. And then also we'll be looking at some of the help and resources that you have available when using the cloud to gain further information. Again, just to give you a large overview of the different aspects. We've got 45 minutes for today's webinar, so plenty of time for any questions if anyone does have them. Please feel free to ask myself or to chuck them in the chat feature, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end for a Q&A session. So just to start with, just to give you an idea of the Caseware Collaborate tool, Caseware Cloud, first thing you must make sure that you've got is obviously your firm-specific URL. If you don't already have access to this, then everything I'm going to mention in today's webinar is going to be new. But generally, or in all cases, other than I think maybe a couple, it would always start with uk.casewarecloud.com. So we've got uk.casewarecloud.com, and then it's followed by a firm-specific URL. So in our case, we're using education, which is our training one. But for you guys, it will be obviously dependent on your firm name. So for us, if it was, we had a Caseware one, our firm specific URL may be Caseware. So yeah, that last section where we got education will be specific for each firm. So just obviously, if you're trying to access your own cloud server, make sure that you are typing in the correct URL. When you jump into here, it'll obviously ask you to log in. And we're going to be looking at during one of the other future webinars, some of the customization options that you have on this login screen. So again, just to give you an idea of how this works, you can customize this screen to show pretty much whatever you want. You can have like your own logo on here, your own name of your entity, for example. You've got control when you're accessing the cloud of what you see at each time and where you see it. Now, when you open up the cloud server for the first time, it'll always open on the activities timeline. So the activities timeline shows you an overview of different elements that have occurred within the Caseware Cloud. So things like discussions that have taken place with different members of staff, or tasks or if we sent file requests to users, we'll be able to see when they were sent, what time they were sent, who they were sent for, the entity that they relate to. And this is a good overview if you want to see any of the happenings within the Caseware cloud as and when you're working on it. Now, the default within the cloud when you first access it is for it to load into all entities, as we can see at the top of the screen. That means it will show me everything that relates to every entity within the Caseware cloud. What we're going to see in a moment is how we can filter that information to show only certain entities, depending on the entity that we're working on. So, for example, if I was working on ABC Motor Company PR Limited, I may only want to see timeline activities that relate to that particular entity. So we'll be able to see how we can filter the information just to show that entity. We'll be able to see how we can filter not just within this screen, but also within different screens on the Caseware cloud, because the filters are slightly different. What I want to do at this point is just give you an overview of some of the navigation options that you have within the Caseware cloud. So we've got the 3 lines button on the right hand side. This is the main navigation tool to access different areas of the different areas of the Caseware cloud. So things like the timeline, activities, I can access the different applications and templates that I have access to on the cloud from this screen. So we've got obviously UK company audit, Mercy. On our server, we've got pretty much all of the different applications that you have access to. On your servers, it may be slightly different. You may have slightly less, depending on the type of, for example, audits that you're working on. If you're using the SE products, then you'll have different applications. If you're just using it for SmartSync, then you may not see any of these applications available. You'll see things like the learning zone that we'll come on to in a bit more detail when we're looking at help and resources. You'll see things like CH submissions because it's available across all of the servers. But these individual templates that we got below will be firm specific. So depending on what you have access to, you may have different templates. But that 3 lines button is pretty much the navigation, the first point of navigation throughout all aspects of the Caseware cloud. So we can see timeline, which is what we're on at the moment. Activities, we can see entities, we can see, again, we'll go into a bit more detail during one of the, or the second part of this series. And we've got the settings, which and the staff, where we can go through and set up staff within the cloud. So that 3 lines button is an important navigation tool within the cloud to be able to jump to different areas. Now, we've got the search function. There'll be a search function on multiple different screens that we'll see today that will allow us to search for elements within, for this example, the timeline. We've got the filter icon, again, which is specific to the timeline. This probably more useful when we go in to look in the individual templates and the applications within the cloud, rather than looking at the timeline itself. You can access different views. So again, looking at navigation, we can have the social view, which just provides us with a little bit more detail of these different timeline activities. We've got the grid view, which shows it in more of a list format. And obviously you've got the timeline view that we saw previously, where it's obviously in a time or on a time basis, so going forward or backwards in time. At the top of the screen, we've got the plus icon on the right hand side. This will allow us to create new discussions, new tasks, new file requests. We'll come back to file requests in a bit more detail later on. We can also access and create new files for the different templates via the plus icon. We've got the search function. So for a quick search, this will allow us to search quickly for entities or people within the cloud. And then finally, we've got the chat function as well. So if I could see James is also on the this cloud server today, so I could chat directly to James if I wanted to. And then we've got the help icon, which will take us to Caseware International's help site for the Caseware cloud. So if you're unsure of anything when you're working on this screen, please feel free to, again, we mentioned that and some of the other help functionality that you have available at the end of today's webinar. Now, looking at obviously the navigation of the cloud, we mentioned this first screen of the timeline. If I go into the 3 lines button and we jump into activities, basically this is pretty much the same thing as what we saw previously, but in more of a list format. So this loads automatically the grid format. The timeline itself, as I say, is more of a time-based approach. But if we go into the individual entities, or we look at the entities in the drop down here, what we would be able to do on these screens is tailor this information to only show that's relevant to a specific entity. So I just, as I mentioned previously, I want to work on ABC Motor Company PR Limited. So if I click the drop down here, I can select ABC Motor Company PR Limited. And what that will do is now only show me timeline activities in relation to this entity. Now, the thing about this drop down is it doesn't just affect this screen, it affects every single aspect of the Caseware cloud. So if I was to go on to an application, for example, UK Company Audit Mercia, this would only show me any files that have been created in relation to ABC Motor Company PR Limited, rather than any entity that's been created at all. So you can see I've got 2 now. So it's just something to be aware of. If you want to just see information relating to a specific entity, you can use that entities drop down. If you select all entities, it will show you a list of any entities that have been created within your cloud server. So again, we're going to go into, in our second part, some information about creating and importing these entities. Again, for anyone using the company's house filing option within the Caseware working papers within the accounts advanced template, we'll know that you need to link your entity to an entity within the Caseware cloud. So your engagement file needs to be linked to a collaborate entity, which is just an entity you can see on this screen, before you can do that submission process. So we'll talk about within the second part of this webinar series how we can create those entities. In terms of the actual entities themselves, obviously we can access this screen by going to entities, but if I select an entity, it'll actually show me a little bit more detail about the entity that's being created. So if I just go into ABC, we'll use ABC Motor Company AL Limited as the example because there's a little bit more stuff in here. But you can see some of the options that we have available. So this will show me detail. When we create the entities, we have the option to include details such as the type of entity, where its address is. Some of this information will pull into the various different templates within the cloud. But what we can also do, and in terms of looking at some of the other options, we've got contacts, so we'll be able to go through and create. And again, we'll come back to this in a bit more detail. We've got file requests. This will show us an overview of everything that we have already included within the cloud in relation to this entity. Now, when we were on the all entity screen, we've got the filter option here. And again, I've mentioned previously in the timeline about the filters. The filters will be available across all the different aspects of the cloud, but the filters will differ slightly depending on what screen we're in. So if I go to the filter here, you can see I can filter by the type of entity. I can filter by who it's been shared with. I can filter by certain tags. So for each of these entities, we can assign tags. For example, is the company Irish? Is it a UK company? You can make the tags whatever you want. They're your own tags. And again, we'll go through and explain how the tags can be created. We can sort them by workflow stage. So in different stages of, if we're working on files, for example, within the audit template, we can search by, are we at the completion section? Are we within the field work? Again, on some of the templates, these filters will be slightly different. We can search by whether we're subscribed to entities, organization types. So you can see the different filters, but as I say, these will differ depending on the screen that we're in. Where the benefit of the filters really comes into its own is within the actual SE templates themselves. So as I'm sure you're aware at this point, we are looking to obviously expand the SE templates that we've got available. At the moment, we've got a vast array of audit templates. We've obviously got UK micro financial statements, but we're looking to obviously expand that into FRS 101, 102 in the future. But if I'm on this screen and I want to be able to filter this information, obviously I can use your entities drop down and I can filter via entity. But if I've got 100 entities on the cloud and I'm looking at the company audit templates for those entities, I may want to see just the ones that I am preparing or I am reviewing within the software. So if I go to this filter icon here, there is an option for assignments, and I can, again, this is quite a useful tool, because I can search by whether I prepared or reviewed. I can filter the information available in the cloud based on that information that I personally need to be looking at. So if I go prepared and I type in my name, you can see now only one entity loads up, and it's the one that I am in charge of preparing. So obviously in this case, we've only got 2 files, but if we had 100 files, this is obviously a useful tool for us to be able to focus specifically on the entities that we need to be working on. And obviously, if I'm going on to the search function as well, I can link that to then the workflow stages that I've mentioned. So not started or pre-planning set. So again, if I'm thinking actually we need to be focusing on, or I've got a few files that are on the review stage, I've got a few that I need to be reviewing, but I just want to see those ones. I can go and search for file ready for review. And then that will show only if I was the reviewer, I could search for the assignment of me as the reviewer, and then search for the workflow stage as files ready to review. So you can understand where the filters will come in handy to be able to filter out the information that we've got in the cloud, filter through files, filter through the workflow stage of a file. Obviously, as I mentioned, the search functionality, in order to search, we would just put in a piece of information that relates to the entity. It could be things like the name of the company or the name of the file, for example. If I type in the name of the file, obviously that will search for that particular entity. And we've already seen the overall top level quick search that we have available on the right hand side. Now, I mentioned these assignments and preparer and reviewer, but just to give you an idea of how you would assign those when you're creating these entities. If we go to new and we create a new file, you can see we have the option here to assign a preparer and a reviewer to the different entities or this particular engagement file. So I can go ABC Motor Company Limited, for example, and then I could go through and say, okay, so I will be preparing it. And then I'll say, okay, so James is going to be my reviewer of the file. And what we will find, so when James goes into his cloud server, he'll be able to search for reviewer, and he'll be able to just see the files, obviously, that he's reviewing. Now, obviously, the benefit of that is if we're in this specific template on the cloud, we'll be able to see that information and we'll be able to filter. So if I'm just working on company audit files, that'd be absolutely fine. But what we'll find, or one of the alternatives to that we need to be aware of, is that if we are working on some company audits, we're working on some charity audits, some academy audits, some tax, we're doing self-assessment tax within the cloud as well. We would need to, or there is another option that we have available where we can see a grand overview of every single aspect or file that we have access to within the Caseware cloud. So all the files I'm preparing, regardless of the entity type. If you go to the 3 lines button, there's an option here for engagements. And what the engagements option will do is it will show us all of the different entities that we have access to. So we've got ABC Promotions, ABC Trust Charity, ABC Motor Company Limited 2021. So one's a charity audit, one's a company audit, and one's a UK micro financial statements. So again, if I go back and I just create a new file, just to show you how they get added in, we'll go and create a UK partnership tax file. So I'm going to call this, we'll assign it to AL Limited. That's one we said we're going to use. We're going to call the partnership tax file Reeves Refreshments, and we're going to click Save. So that will obviously open up the file, but we're not interested in the file at this point. If I go back to engagements or go back into this screen and I select myself as a preparer of this file, I can go back into engagements, and when I refresh that information, that file will now be available on my list. So you can see this engagement screen will allow us to obviously, rather than just looking at a specific template, will show us an overview of all the different templates we have access to. So I can select one of these entities and it will tell me the document status. So how many documents within that particular file are outstanding, how many have been prepared, how many have been reviewed. And we've got information like staff hours and billing. So this is based on, and we've also got start and end date. So this is based on, again, when we're setting up those files, we can include information like the start date and the end date and what the budgeted hours are. So when we provide that information, we get a fuller overview within the engagement screen of how much time we've spent on files, when we need to be finishing them by, what status we're at, have we started this file, are we in the, again, the different stages of that file within the workflow that we could potentially be looking at. Okay, as we mentioned, obviously with regards to the templates, for those of you that are looking specifically, are looking at this Collaborate but don't really use the audit templates, but use it more for the SmartSync side, you can go to the working papers application. And what this will do, we haven't got any files at the moment, but what this will show you is any SmartSync files that have been linked up into the cloud. So again, if you want to see an overview of all the different SmartSync files that are uploaded into the financial state, into the Caseware cloud, you'd also have the option to do that. Again, for each of these applications, there are also various views that have been assigned. So if I go to the drop down here, you can see at the moment, I'm on the UK Company Audit Mercia template. And the view that we're assigning is the UK Company Audit Mercia view. So it may be that we actually want to assign an alternative view. And again, as part of this webinar series, we'll be looking at how you can manage and create your own views to show only the important information that's related to you. We'll also show you how you can report on this information as and when you're creating it. But if we wanted to assign an alternative view, we use the drop down, we've got staff assignment view, so we can see who the preparers and reviewers of the files are. And again, this just allows us to better understand how much work different users have got, and how much work they need to be doing at a certain point in time. Obviously, in terms of the templates themselves, we've got, as I've already mentioned, UK Company Audit Hat. If there's certain elements of templates that you actually were unaware of, or that you wanted access to at any point, please let us know, and we can get the account manager involved, and they can discuss, obviously, the various templates. Now, as I mentioned, when we're going into these different entities, I want to go into ABC Motor Company AL Limited. As I've said, we can set up contacts within those entities. So looking at contacts and clients, the real benefit of setting up these contacts is that regardless of whether we are using one of the relevant audit templates or the tax templates, we can request information from the contacts that we set up within the cloud. So this can be used as I've already said, not just a collaborate tool within your company, but also outside of the company too. For example, again, James could be my client and I want to speak to him about or obtain a TV from him. So I could do it that way. But before that, I need to make sure I can add the contacts. So adding contacts will be available to those who've got the appropriate roles and security settings available within the cloud. Again, if anyone's unsure of what those roles are, then please feel free to jump onto our second webinar where we talk about roles and access levels. But if you've got the right access level, you can press the add button to create a new contact. You can also import existing contacts. So if I go to add a new contact, I can provide an email address. So we can go caseware.learner@, just go gmail.com. We can give them a name. So we'll give, again, you've got the general gist of obviously inserting a name. So we'll call him Steve Rogers. Now, one thing to be aware of when we are setting up contacts so we can collaborate with them throughout the Caseware Cloud Suite, you want to make sure that you are selecting the correct access level for that contact. So there are two different standard access levels that you have available to you. There is the entity collaborator and the entity access level. Entity collaborator will mean that the user will have the ability to, as it says here, create their own contact content and access existing content. So when you assign a user to the role, they'll be able to send you file requests or view documents that you have put on the cloud for them. So if you, I don't know, create a discussion with that particular client or particular contact, they'll be able to view that information. The difference with that entity access, they'll basically just be able to jump onto the slide, jump onto the entity, and they'll only be able to see certain documents that you've given them access to. So they won't be able to receive file requests. They won't be able to initiate discussions, whereas the collaborator can instigate discussions. It gives them a lot more control. The contacts don't need licenses, so you have complete control over the amount of contacts that you provide within the cloud. You can have as many as you want. You can have one, you can have whatever you want. But it's important that you provide the right entity access level. So I'm going to give our Steve Rogers a collaborator access level. Obviously, password I'd probably be set by the user. You can also set it to be auto-generated. You can also set a password for them, and then obviously provide them, and then they may be asked to, by default, it would ask them to change that password when they sign in. Groups, again, will come into a bit more detail during the second part of our webinar series, but the groups that we can set up will allow us to allocate a group of contacts to a group of companies, for example. So we might be working on 10 companies that are all part of the same group, and we need information from one contact that relates to that certain group. So we can set up groups and assign the contacts to those groups so that we don't have to assign them to every single company that we're looking at. Applications, again, this will depend on the groups that they've been assigned to. So because we haven't assigned any groups, they can view certain aspects of different templates. Again, the real benefit if you're using the SE templates is that you can join this element of file requests with the actual template itself. So we'll go through that in a bit more detail when we're looking at sharing content in a moment. When we set up these contacts, you can see it's successfully set up. This person will be able to log in, as it says, can sign in, and that's our third contact on ABC Motor Company AL Limited. Now, in terms of requesting content from that user, that can be done within individual files and templates themselves through a tool that we have. If I go into a specific file, within the files themselves, so this is just a company audit template file, we've got a client information request. So that client information request can be used to request information such as the trial balance. And you can tailor these documents to meet the needs of individual clients, or you can go through and create a customized template. Again, we have got a webinar coming up in a couple of weeks for an introduction to customizations on audit templates. Again, if that's something that you're interested in, please feel free to jump onto that webinar. The dates and information will be available at the end of today's webinar. But for those of you that aren't, again, to keep this generalized, for those of you that aren't using the individual templates, you may just want to request some information and house that within the Caseware Cloud. Remember, the Caseware Cloud it's a collaboration tool, but it can also be a hub, not just for Caseware data, but also for any data. If we go into this ABC Motor Company AL Limited, you can see we've got a PowerPoint presentation available on here. We can upload pretty much anything, PDFs, Excel files, Word documents, into the Caseware Cloud. So it can act as a hub. And the benefit of that is that different users can access it. So again, me and Sophie are working on an audit together, but the audit is within the desktop version of the software. And Sophie's requested some information from the client that I may also need. If we request that information, it goes up, uploads into the cloud. We'll both be able to get it quite easily if we're both accessing the cloud server. Now, when it comes to requesting that information from the users, as I said, we've got the client information request within the individual templates, but what we've also got, if I go to the plus icon, is a file request option. So if I load up a file request, you can see I get the option to select an entity. Caseware, because we're in the ABC Motor Company AL Limited entity, will automatically select that. But again, I can search for an alternative if I need to. And then we need to select who our recipients are. So who do I actually want to send this information to? So I might want to send it to James. I might want to send it to, I might want to send it to all the contacts because I'm not sure which one of them is going to respond to me. So I select the contact, of ABC Motor Company Limited that can upload files. So basically, again, looking at those entity access, those that have collaborator access when we set up the contact, will be able to upload files. We then click next, and we basically, it's very much like creating an email for a user. So we can go, okay, so trial balance could be our subject. Hi, please upload a copy of the current year trial balance. We provide information. We provide a nice message. Thanks, Bill. We can attach a document to it. So again, we're requesting information from the user, but it might be that we're requesting them to review a piece of information, or it might be asking them for, if we want to send them an example of information that we're requesting. So it might be that we're asking for like a fixed asset register or a certain schedule that will help us in some way, rather than us just going, oh, can you send us this? We could say, can you send us this? It will look like this, for example. And obviously, if we've got a tight schedule, we can add a due date on there if we need to. Once we're happy, we press the complete option. I'm going to change the name of this because we've already got a trial balance subject. So I'll just change this to current year trial balance just to avoid any confusion. And then we press complete. Now at the bottom of the screen, it's being cut off slightly. There we go. So we can see successfully created the file request. It's available in our file request section within the entity. So again, as I said, everything in relation to this entity will be available on this screen. And we got our current year trial balance request. Now, just to give you an idea of what that will look like from your client's perspective, they will get an email that if you can, again, we're going to look at some of the customizations on email settings during this webinar series. But if you just give them the bog basic version, just waiting for this to load up on my screen, just to give you an idea of what that will look like, it essentially will allow them to, or it will inform them that an activity has been emailed to them. So again, just bear with me for 1 second. Hopefully this will load up. There we go. Bring this over to this side. There we go. Yeah, so you can see that we get, so we're saying hi to the user, an activity has been emailed to you. Now, what we're going to see on my screen, what they're going to see is going to be slightly different because of the fact that I'm still logged in to the cloud. But if I go to, they'll be able to view the details, and that will load up a instance of the Caseware cloud. So they'll have to log in. This is where I've realized I don't remember the password. There we go. They'll be able to log in, and what they'll see from their perspective is literally just the file information request that we sent. So if I go to that drop down, they won't have access to all these applications because of the fact that, again, I've logged in as an administrator within this cloud server. But they'll be able to go into things, they'll be able to respond to it, they'll be able to drag and drop documents. So it's a very useful way of providing information. So if I was to drag and drop a trial balance into this file, let me just go in and grab a trial balance. Again, just to give you an idea of how that collaboration works. So we'll just drag and drop this one for now. They can provide a response. Hi, please find attached. And that will upload that into the, and then process that into the server. Now, once that's uploaded and obviously the response has been sent, going back to our perspective, if I refresh my cloud server as the user, what I'll now find is that TB is automatically available in the files section. And also we can see that it's been responded to. So you can see it's a very quick and easy way of connecting with the contacts, sharing information with them, and being able to obtain documents and information directly from the user. Again, it's a collaborative tool that isn't widely or that it is a lot more useful in terms of obtaining and sending information than maybe an email might be, because it's instant. It'll also upload instantly into this section of the cloud server, and we can obviously transport that information into, if we're working on either the cloud or the desktop, the files that we're working on. So obviously I can go back into here and say, oh, that's perfect. Thanks. So that's an overview of the information request and requesting that information and sharing that information with the client. Just quickly to give you an idea of how easy it is to pull that information into a file. If you're using the Smart Engagement templates, if I just wanted to drop into this section, I can go to the plus icon. I can go to upload. Oh, sorry, I can go to the copy from Caseware Cloud option. And you can see there it is, RS transport TB. Obviously, in this case, it may not necessarily, it should have, obviously, we may respond and go, actually, we need the ABC Mode Company trial balance, but you get the idea of how easy it is to transfer that data accordingly. And obviously, if we were in a working papers file, we can pull that information as well into working papers. So yeah, the final element for us to look at today in terms of, so we've looked at some of the filter options. Obviously, I mentioned the filter icon, the search functions, the engagement screen. If we go back into engagement, we've looked at some of the various templates. We haven't gone into them in too much detail, but we're looking specifically at the collaborate options available within the cloud. But one thing, or just want to make you aware of some of the other helpful options to help and resources that you have available when you're using the Caseware Cloud. So as well as the cloud assistance that we saw earlier, when we go to the icon here and we select help, we've also got a Caseware Cloud or various Caseware Cloud e-courses that you can access. So just wait for that to load in. That will open up the Caseware Learn Upon page. This is our online Learn Upon screen. Our online Caseware learning platform where you can find courses that you can access. We've also got the Getting Started guide for Caseware Cloud, which again, when I load that up, focuses on things like accessing Caseware Cloud, adding staff, entities, discussions, tasks, tags, everything you can possibly think of within Caseware Cloud is covered in that Getting Started guide. And obviously we've got the knowledge base, and which I'm sure you've all accessed before. And if you haven't, then there is an option here to register now. So again, if anyone hasn't got access to the knowledge base, please feel free to let us know, and my colleague James can send over a link to that in the chat field. Now, if at any point that you're unsure of where to access this information, you're working within the Caseware Cloud, just to make you aware that there is an option called the Learning Zone. So you can see you can access the cloud online courses, you can access the knowledge base. We've also got LinkedIn and YouTube. Again, James will point out in a bit more detail later on. But that can be accessed directly from the Caseware Cloud as well by going to the 3 lines button and just selecting the Learning Zone option. So that was an overview of some of the collaboration options. We've gone, obviously, talked about navigation, filters, searches, all those areas that were on our initial agenda. If anyone has any specific questions or areas that they want some more information on, please feel free to add it into the chat. But for now, I'm going to pass you back over to my colleague James for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, so we haven't actually had any questions or queries come in, so I'll take that as a good sign. So if we go ahead and we can just start rounding up the end. Perfect. Again, yeah, if you have any questions pop into your head now, then just pop them on the chat field, the Q&A field, as shown on screen there. Just in regards to upcoming webinars, here's a list of a couple of them are upcoming. If you want to see a full extensive list of every single webinar that we have planned, jump onto the caseware.co.uk/events page. That has the latest up-to-date events on there as well, and not just webinars. So it lists all conferences that we'll be attending as well. And yep, just through that screen there. So that's through the home screen. You can click resources and on the drop down, hit events there. Perfect. And yeah, like Phil said, just to cover the YouTube and LinkedIn. So we have a Caseware Client Services LinkedIn page. There are two LinkedIn pages. It's the main Caseware one and the Client Services. If you follow the Client Services one, then you'll notice that we post more of the education and media kind of content and reminders for upcoming webinars as well, so you don't miss out on anything. And we have the YouTube channel for the Client Services as well. That's where we post all the webinars and all the quick vids as well that you find within the KB. So if you prefer watching content and navigating that way, you can use all the playlists there and sort by product. If we just jump onto the next screen. Perfect. And just a quick overview on the KB. If you do have any questions or queries, just pop them in the search function there. And they are also sorted again by product as well. So if you've got any issues, just jump onto the KB. It's free to register, so there's no need to worry about that. And if you want to have a chat with any of our support technicians, you can use the field, nicely shown off there, Phil, in the bottom right there. That will get you in contact with one of our support guys, and equally you can give them a call as well if you need to have a screen share or something like that for your issue. Perfect. And last screen there. Just to round off, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.